The pen, a masterpiece of gold and onyx worth more than a car, hovered an inch above the most important contract of Alistair Finch's life. With this single signature, his company, Finch Innovations, would acquire Helios Dynamics in a staggering $9 billion deal, cementing his legacy forever. The room was silent, filled with the scent of old money and ambition. His lawyers beamed, the opposing CEO smirked in triumph, and cameras flashed to capture the historic moment. But then, a soft voice, barely a ghost of a sound, cut through the tension. A waitress refilling his water glass leaned in and whispered 5 words that would ignite a firestorm. "Don't sign this, Mr. Finch." Everyone saw her speak, but only he heard the warning. And what he did next, no one could have ever predicted. The Gilded Quill was not a restaurant. It was a theater where power was the main course. Nestled on the 57th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling kingdom of light and shadow. Tonight, the lead actor was Alistair Finch, a man whose name was synonymous with disruptive technology. At 68, he still possessed the sharp, predatory gaze that had unnerved competitors for 4 decades. He wasn't a product of inherited wealth. He was a titan forged in the fires of Silicon Valley's early days, a man who had built an empire from a garage and a revolutionary idea. Across the polished mahogany table sat Julian Croft, the CEO of Helios Dynamics. Croft was everything Alistair was not. Young, slick, with a smile that was too white and a handshake that lasted a fraction too long. He was the kind of man who wore his success like a costume. His company, Helios, was the darling of the tech world, creators of the Prometheus chip, a processor so advanced it promised to redefine artificial intelligence. The $9 billion acquisition was the culmination of 6 months of brutal negotiations. It was a legacy deal for Alistair, the final gleaming jewel in his corporate crown. Alistair's lead counsel, Robert Carlyle, a man whose face was a permanent mask of cautious optimism, slid the signature page forward. "Alistair," Robert murmured, his voice respectful, "history awaits." Alistair picked up the custom-made Mont Blanc pen. The weight of it felt significant, a scepter of his own making. He looked at Julian Croft, who gave him a confident, almost condescending nod. He saw the anxious excitement in the faces of his own board members and the triumphant relief on the faces of the Helios team. This was it, the culmination of everything. It was in that moment of profound silence, as the nib of the pen was about to kiss the paper, that she appeared. She moved with a practiced, almost invisible grace, a waitress weaving through a world she was meant to serve, but never entered. Her name tag read Clara. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with tired eyes that held a flicker of something fierce and desperate. Her uniform was immaculate, a stark contrast to the frayed edges of her composure. She reached for Alistair's water glass with a steady hand, a simple, mundane act. As she leaned in, her body momentarily shielding the movement of her lips from the rest of the table, her voice reached him, and him alone. It was a whisper, urgent and sharp, laced with a terror that felt chillingly real. "Don't sign this, Mr. Finch." The words were so unexpected, so completely out of place, that for a moment Alistair thought he had imagined them. He froze, his hands suspended in midair. He slowly lifted his gaze from the contract to meet hers. Her eyes, wide and pleading, held his for a single, searing second. It wasn't the look of a prankster or a madwoman. It was the look of Cassandra, a prophetess bearing a terrible truth. In that fleeting connection, he saw not just fear, but conviction. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she straightened up, her face becoming a neutral mask of professional service, and moved away from the table. The spell was broken. "Something wrong, Alistair?" Julian Croft asked, his smooth voice unable to hide a sliver of irritation. The entire room was staring at him. Robert Carlyle's brow was furrowed with concern. Alistair's pen was still poised for a signature that now felt impossibly heavy. Every instinct, every lifetime of gut feelings that had guided him through treacherous business deals screamed at him. He had built his empire by recognizing patterns, by seeing the flaw in the perfect design. And this girl, this ghost in the machine of his triumph, was a flaw he could not ignore. He slowly, deliberately placed the pen down on the table beside the contract. The small click echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. "A slight cramp in my hand," Alistair said, his voice calm and even, a masterpiece of control. He began to flex his fingers, making a show of it. "An old injury is acting up. Happens when I'm about to do something strenuous." He offered a thin, disarming smile. "And spending $9 billion is certainly strenuous." The tension in the room eased, replaced by polite, sycophantic laughter. Julian Croft relaxed back into his chair, the smirk returning. But Robert Carlyle, who had known Alistair for 30 years, wasn't fooled. He saw the flicker in his old friend's eyes. It was the look he got right before he gutted an opponent. Alistair wasn't cramping. He was thinking. And when Alistair Finch was thinking, someone was about to be in a great deal of trouble. Alistair's mind was racing. Who was she? How could she possibly know anything about this deal? What could she possibly know that his own multi-million-dollar due diligence team had missed? It was insane. It was illogical. It was also the most compelling thing that had happened to him in a decade. He needed to talk to her. Now. Alistair Finch didn't get to where he was by being predictable. While Julian Croft and his team celebrated with premature toasts of champagne, Alistair played his part, the aging lion nursing a minor ailment. He engaged in small talk, deflected questions about the signing with practiced ease, but his mind was a whirlwind of strategic planning. His eyes subtly scanned the restaurant, searching for the waitress named Clara. He saw her once, a fleeting glimpse as she disappeared through a set of swinging doors marked "Staff Only." He needed a diversion, something dramatic enough to clear the room of its key players and give him a window of opportunity. "Robert," he said, turning to his lawyer, his voice a little strained, "could you assist me for a moment? I feel a bit unwell. Perhaps some fresh air." He pressed a hand to his chest, a subtle but alarming gesture. Robert was by his side instantly, his face etched with genuine concern. "Of course, Alistair. Let's step out onto the terrace." Julian Croft's face tightened. A medical emergency was the one variable he hadn't accounted for. "Is everything all right, Alistair? Should we call a doctor?" "No, no." Alistair waved a dismissive hand, looking convincingly pale. He had learned long ago that the best way to control a room was to feign a moment of weakness. "Just a touch of vertigo, the height perhaps. A few minutes is all I need. Please continue enjoying yourselves. We'll conclude our business shortly." Leaning on Robert, he allowed himself to be escorted away from the table. As they passed the bar, Alistair whispered into Robert's ear, his voice now firm and clear. "I'm fine, Robert. Play along. I need 5 minutes alone. Cause a distraction if you have to. Keep Croft occupied." Robert's eyes widened in understanding. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded, his loyalty absolute. Once out on the private terrace, with the cool night wind whipping at his suit, Alistair left Robert to field concerned inquiries and moved with a speed that belied his age. He bypassed the main entrance and found a service corridor. It smelled of bleach and boiled linen. It was a different world from the opulent dining room, the hidden engine of the grand vessel. He pushed through the swinging doors he'd seen Clara enter. The kitchen was a chaotic ballet of steam, clattering pans and shouted orders. He stood out immediately, a figure of immense wealth in a sharkskin suit amidst the stainless steel and white aprons. He spotted her near a dishwashing station, her back to him, her shoulders slumped. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. She spun around, a plate slipping from her soapy hands and shattering on the tiled floor. Her face went white with panic, not just at the broken dish, but at the sight of him. The head chef, a burly man with a fiery temper, started to yell, but fell silent when he saw the authority in Alistair's posture. "You and I need to talk," Alistair said, ignoring everyone else. "Now." He gestured towards a small, cramped break room. Her eyes darted around nervously. I can't. I'll lose my job." "You're about to either save my company or lose your job anyway," Alistair countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The choice is yours. You have 60 seconds of my time." Trembling, she wiped her hands on her apron and followed him into the break room, a tiny windowless space that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. She stood before him, looking less like a corporate savior and more like a frightened doe. "Who are you?" he asked, getting straight to the point. "My name is Clara Hayes." "That's not what I asked. Why shouldn't I sign that contract?" She took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze meeting his. The fear was still there. But beneath it, the fire he'd seen earlier was burning brighter. "Because Helios Dynamics is a lie. The Prometheus chip. It's a fraud." Alistair felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. His due diligence team was the best in the world. They had spent months poring over Helios's data. "I have 100 analysts and engineers who would disagree with you. They've seen the specs, the benchmarks, the stress tests. The data is flawless." "Because the data is fake," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I was a junior data analyst at Helios. I was on the Prometheus project. The chip has a fundamental flaw. Under sustained high-level processing loads, it suffers from catastrophic thermal runaway. It doesn't just overheat, it cascades. It can fry not just itself, but the entire system it's integrated into. They've found workarounds for the short-term demos, but in any real-world, long-term application, it's a ticking time bomb." Alistair remained impassive, his face a granite mask, but his mind was calculating. If this is true, there would be a record. Original data, memos, something. "There was," Clara said, a bitter edge to her voice. "I found it. The original, unaltered test logs were buried on a partitioned server. I saw the failure rates. They were over 80% in critical simulations. When I tried to bring it to my superior, I was stonewalled. The next day, I was called into HR and fired for performance issues. My network access was revoked, and I was escorted out by security. They threatened me with a lawsuit if I ever spoke about my work at Helios." "Why are you a waitress?" A tear welled in her eye, a single drop of frustration. "Because Julian Croft blacklisted me. He has connections everywhere. Every tech firm I applied to turned me down. No interviews, no explanations. I had to pay my rent. My father," she trailed off, shaking her head. "I had to survive." Alistair's gaze sharpened. "Do you have proof of this? The original data?" This was the moment of truth. If she had nothing but a story, this was all a waste of time. Clara reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, cheap-looking USB flash drive. "When I found the original logs, I knew they would try to erase them. I made a copy. It's all there. The raw data, internal emails from Croft ordering the data to be sanitized, and the list of engineers who were quietly fired or reassigned after raising concerns. I'm not the only one, Mr. Finch. I'm just the one who was desperate enough to get your attention." She held out the drive. It was a tiny piece of plastic that could either be worthless or worth $9 billion. Taking it was an act of faith, an admission that his entire process, his trusted team, might have failed. It was a risk that could make him look like a fool. He took the flash drive from her trembling hand. "If you're lying to me, Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice deadly serious, "the legal resources of Finch Innovations will make Mr. Croft's blacklisting feel like a fond memory." "And if I'm telling the truth," she shot back, her fear finally giving way to defiance, "you'll be saving your company from the biggest technological disaster of the century." Alistair looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the intelligence behind the exhaustion, the integrity warring with her fear. He saw a conviction that couldn't be faked. It reminded him of someone from a long, long time ago. He pocketed the drive. "Go back to work. Don't say a word to anyone." Without another word, he turned and left the break room, walking back into the lion's den with a secret that could either detonate his legacy or redefine it entirely. Returning to the terrace, Alistair's demeanor was a masterpiece of deception. He was the picture of a man recovering from a minor health scare, patting Robert on the shoulder and offering a reassuring smile to a hovering Julian Croft. "My apologies, Julian," Alistair said, his voice smooth as silk. "A momentary dizzy spell. It seems my doctor was right about cutting back on the late nights." Croft's relief was palpable. "As long as you're well, Alistair, shall we conclude our business?" He gestured back toward the table where the contract lay, waiting like a patient predator. Alistair held up a hand. "Patience, my friend. My little episode has given me pause. A deal of this magnitude, it requires a clear head. I'm afraid I must postpone the final signature. A collective gasp, though silent, seemed to suck the air from the terrace. Croft's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Postpone? Alistair, we have journalists on standby. The markets are expecting an announcement. This is highly irregular. So is a $9 billion acquisition, Alistair countered calmly. The weight of the flash drive in his pocket felt like a block of lead. My team and I will reconvene first thing in the morning to give the final annexes one last review. A formality, of course. We will sign tomorrow at my headquarters, 10 a.m. sharp. This is non-negotiable. The tone in his voice, the shift from collegial partner to unyielding commander, left no room for argument. Julian Croft, though seething, could only nod in tight-lipped agreement. To protest further would be to show weakness, to reveal a desperation that would raise more questions. The deal was paused, hanging by the thinnest of threads. The drive back to his penthouse was silent. Robert Carlyle sat beside him in the back of the Maybach, the city light streaking past the tinted windows. Robert knew better than to press, but the question hung in the air between them. Finally, Alistair spoke, his gaze fixed on the endless stream of traffic. Robert, I need you to get me everything you can find on a former Helios employee, a junior data analyst named Clara Hayes. I want to know where she went to school, who her parents are, what she had for breakfast. Everything. Use our top private investigators. Discreetly. He then pulled out the flash drive and handed it to Robert. And I want this delivered to Evelyn Reed. Tell her it's a Red Scepter priority. I want her and her cybersecurity team to crack it open. I need a full report on my desk by 6 a.m. Tell her to cancel all her plans. Robert took the drive, his eyes widening at the mention of Red Scepter, Alistair's personal code for a potential corporate cataclysm. It was a protocol that had been activated only twice in 30 years, both times preceding a hostile takeover that had reshaped an entire industry. Alistair, what's going on? Robert finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity. What did that waitress say to you? She told me we're standing on a trap door, Alistair replied grimly, and I need Evelyn to tell me if she's right. While Robert set the wheels of the investigation in motion, Alistair retreated to his study, a room lined with books and the ghosts of past battles. He poured himself a Macallan 25, the amber liquid doing little to soothe the storm in his mind. Clara Hayes. The name echoed, stirring a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. He thought about his own past. He'd been that hungry kid once, the outsider with nothing but a desperate belief in his own idea. He'd fought tooth and nail against giants who tried to crush him. His greatest mentor, a brilliant but unassuming professor named Arthur Vance, had been the one who taught him the most important lesson. The data never lies, Alistair. People lie. Ambition lies. But the pure, unvarnished data tells the only truth that matters. Arthur Vance had been his moral compass, a man of unshakable integrity who had co-signed the loan for Alistair's first real lab. Arthur had a daughter. Alistair had only met her a few times when she was a little girl, a bright-eyed child with pigtails. He hadn't seen Arthur in years, the old professor having retired to a quiet life upstate after his wife passed away. On a hunch, Alistair pulled up a secure line and called his personal assistant. Diana, I need you to find an address for Arthur Vance, former professor of computer science at Stanford. Yes, that's the one. While he waited, the first encrypted email from Evelyn Reed arrived. Her team, a legendary group of white-hat hackers and digital forensics experts housed in a secure facility known as the Vault, was already at work. Subject: Red Scepter Preliminary Encryption Level. Omega, Mr. Finch. The device is a standard consumer-grade USB 2.0. Low-level security. However, the data within is another story. It's concealed within a multi-layered encrypted container, masquerading as corrupted image files. This wasn't done by an amateur. Whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. We're peeling back the layers now. We'll update as we progress. Reed Alistair felt a surge of adrenaline. An amateur would have just copied the files. This was different. This was the work of someone who knew they were being hunted, someone who had carefully prepared for this exact moment. An hour later, another email. Subject: Red Scepter Update, Layer 4 Encryption Level. Omega, Mr. Finch, we're in. It's a treasure trove. Raw simulation logs, internal memos, server access records. Initial comparison with the data Helios provided our diligence team shows massive discrepancies. I'm talking night and day. The official reports show a 0.01% failure rate. These raw logs show rates climbing to over 85% on sustained performance tests. I've attached a preliminary summary. The term thermal runaway appears 427 times in the engineer's original notes. This term is entirely absent from the official documentation we were given. Evelyn Allister's blood ran cold. He opened the attachment. The screen filled with charts and graphs, a stark mathematical portrait of a catastrophe in the making. The Prometheus chip wasn't just flawed, it was a Trojan horse. Integrating it into Finch Innovations' global cloud infrastructure, as planned, would be an act of corporate suicide. It would cause data corruption, system-wide failures, and security breaches on a scale he couldn't even comprehend. It would destroy his company from the inside out. Just then, his private investigator's report on Clara Hayes arrived in a separate, secure channel. He opened it, his eyes scanning the details of her life. Graduated top of her class from Stanford, a double major in computer science and applied mathematics. A glowing recommendation from her department head. Then the piece of information that made the world stand still. Father, Arthur Vance. Mother, deceased. The glass of whiskey slipped from Allister's hand, shattering on the marble floor. It wasn't just some random waitress. It was Arthur's daughter, the daughter of the man who had taught him to always trust the data. She hadn't just saved his company. She was carrying on her father's legacy of truth, a legacy Allister himself had nearly betrayed. The game had changed. This was no longer just about business, it was about honor. And Allister Finch was about to remind Julian Croft what happened when someone threatened his honor. The first rays of dawn sliced through the blinds of Allister's study, finding him not asleep, but energized by a cold, righteous fury. The floor was littered with printouts, the damning evidence from Evelyn Reed's team. Side-by-side comparisons of Helios's fraudulent data and the horrifying truth Clara had provided. Interspersed were internal emails, cold and clinical in their criminality. One from Julian Croft to his head of R&D stood out. The Finch deal is our only lifeline. Bury the thermal runaway data. I don't care how. Sanitize the logs and get me a report that shows a 99.9% success rate, or start updating your resumes. And then, the most chilling discovery, a human resources termination file for one Clara Hayes, flagged with a DNR, do not rehire, and a note, personally initiated by Croft. Potential legal liability, monitor external communications, advise partners in the sector against engagement. It was a digital death sentence. He hadn't just fired her. He had systematically tried to erase her from the industry. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a war. At 6:05 a.m., Allister began making calls. His first was to Robert Carlyle. "Robert, cancel the 10 a.m. meeting," Allister commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Reschedule it for 2 p.m. and change the venue. Not our main boardroom. Book conference room 7, the big one with the full media wall." "Conference room 7? Robert sounded confused. "Allister, that's our presentation theater. It seats over 100 people." "I know what it is," Allister said. "I want you to extend the invitation to our entire executive board. And I want you to invite Helios Dynamics Board of Directors as well. Tell them it's a synergy presentation to celebrate the finalized deal. Make it sound like a party." "Their board? Allister, that's highly unorthodox." "Everything about this is unorthodox, Robert. Now for the most important part. I want you to quietly reach out to 3 journalists, the 3 most ruthless investigative reporters we know. I'm talking about Sarah Jennings from the Wall Street Journal, Mark O'Donnell from Bloomberg Tech, and that freelancer, David Hayes, the one who brought down Omnicorp. Tell them I have an off-the-record story for them that will be the biggest scoop of their careers. Put them under a strict embargo until I give the signal. Seat them in the back as my personal consultants." A long silence followed on the other end of the line. "My God, Alistair," Robert finally breathed. "You're not just going to kill the deal. You're planning a public execution. Croft tried to sell me a bomb and destroy the daughter of my oldest friend." Alistair replied, his voice like ice. "An execution is merciful." His next call was to a number he hadn't dialed in over a decade. It rang 4 times before a gravelly, sleepy voice answered. "Hello? Arthur, it's Alistair Finch." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "Alistair? Well, I'll be. I thought you'd have forgotten about this old dinosaur by now. To what do I owe the honor?" "I met your daughter, Arthur," Alistair said simply. The warmth in Arthur Vance's voice evaporated, replaced by paternal concern. "Clara? Is she all right? She's been having a hard time. Lost her job. Couldn't find another." "She's more than all right, Arthur," Alistair said. "She's a hero, and she reminded me of a lesson her father taught me a long time ago about trusting the data. I need you to do me a favor. I'm sending a car for you. I need you in Manhattan this afternoon. There's something I think you should see in person." His final call was the most difficult. He got Clara's number from the investigator's report. He dialed and she picked up on the first ring, her voice anxious. "Mr. Finch?" "Ms. Hayes," he said formally, then softened his tone. "Clara, I've reviewed the contents of the drive. You were right, about everything." He heard a sharp intake of breath, a sound of profound, shaky relief. "So? You're not signing?" "We have bigger plans than that," Alistair said. "I need you to come to my headquarters, Finch Tower, at 1:30 p.m. today. There's a meeting I want you to attend. And Clara, don't wear your waitress uniform." He arranged for a car to pick her up and for his personal assistant to provide her with a clothing allowance and access to a stylist. He wanted her to walk into that room not as a victim, but as the victor she was. The hours leading up to the 2 p.m. meeting were a blur of meticulous preparation. Alistair worked with Evelyn Reed and her team to distill the mountain of incriminating data into a clear, undeniable, and devastating presentation. They created slides that showed the faked benchmarks next to the real ones. They highlighted Croft's emails in stark red boxes. They compiled a list of every engineer Helios had wrongfully terminated in connection with the Prometheus cover-up. At 1:30 p.m., Clara Hayes arrived. She was transformed. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue business dress, her hair professionally styled, she looked less like a harried waitress and more like the brilliant analyst she was. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, nervous determination. She walked into Alistair's office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the city. "You look like you belong here," Alistair said with a genuine smile. "I feel like I'm dreaming," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper as she gazed out the window. Alistair walked to stand beside her. "Your father, Arthur, was one of the finest men I've ever known. A man of absolute integrity. He'd be incredibly proud of you today." Clara's eyes glistened with tears. "You knew my dad?" "He co-signed the loan that started this company," Alistair said, gesturing to the sprawling empire below them. "In many ways, he laid the first brick. What you did, you protected his legacy as much as you protected mine." He then walked her through the presentation, showing her exactly how he planned to dismantle Julian Croft's empire of lies. He explained that her father was waiting in a nearby office. He wanted her to be prepared for what was about to happen. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, and he wanted her to be a willing participant in its delivery. As they finished, Robert Carlyle entered the office. "They're all here, Alistair. Croft, his board, our board. The journalists are in place. The stage is set." Alistair nodded. He turned to Clara. "Are you ready, Ms. Hayes?" She took a deep breath, her gaze firm and clear. "I'm ready, Mr. Finch." "Good," he said, a predatory glint in his eye. "Let's go give them a synergy presentation they'll never forget." Conference Room 7 was buzzing. It was a state-of-the-art amphitheater designed to impress, with tiered seating, individual monitors at every station, and a colossal, seamless screen, the media wall, that currently displayed the merged logos of Finch Innovations and Helios Dynamics under the banner. forging the future together. The atmosphere was thick with corporate schmoozing and self-congratulation. The Finch Innovations board members, still unaware of the storm about to break, mingled with their Helios counterparts. Julian Croft was at the center of it all, a conquering hero holding court. He was laughing, shaking hands, his earlier irritation completely forgotten. He had his $9 billion prize and he was savoring the moment. He spotted Alistair Finch enter from a side door and raised his glass in a toast. "Alistair," Croft boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "Glad to see you're feeling better. Ready to make history?" "History is precisely what we're here to make, Julian," Alistair replied, his voice carrying an ambiguous weight. He walked not to the front podium, but to a seat in the front row. A moment later, Clara Hayes walked in. A confused murmur rippled through the Helios delegation. A few of them recognized her. Julian Croft's smile froze on his face. He stared at her, then at Alistair, his mind scrambling to process her presence. Why was his disgraced, blacklisted former analyst here, dressed like a senior executive? Clara ignored the stares. Head held high, she walked to the front row and took the seat Alistair had indicated for her, right beside his. This simple act was a declaration of war. Croft's face paled, the first flicker of genuine panic appearing in his eyes. The room quieted. Robert Carlyle moved to the podium. "Good afternoon, everyone," Robert began, his voice formal and steady. "Mr. Finch has asked me to begin today's Synergy presentation. Before we proceed with the formal signing of the acquisition documents, Mr. Finch would like to share some final thoughts on the spirit of partnership and the foundational importance of due diligence." All eyes turned to Alistair. He rose slowly and walked to the podium, his presence commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. He looked out at the sea of faces, his trusted colleagues, the smug members of the Helios board, and in the back, the three journalists who were now leaning forward, pens poised. "Thank you all for coming," Alistair began, his voice calm and resonant. "Mergers and acquisitions are often described in the language of battle. We conquer, we capture, we win. But I've always preferred to see them as acts of trust. A company isn't just its assets or its intellectual property. It is, at its core, a collection of promises. A promise to its employees, to its customers, and to its partners. Today we are here to celebrate the union of two companies based on such a promise." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian Croft was starting to sweat. "The promise of Helios Dynamics rests on a single, revolutionary piece of technology. The Prometheus chip," Alistair continued. He gestured to the media wall, and the merged logos were replaced by a sleek 3D rendering of the chip. "It's a marvel of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity. We were promised a chip with a 99.99% success rate under peak load, a chip that would change the world." He looked directly at Julian Croft. "And Julian, you and your team delivered a spectacular set of data to back up that promise. Benchmark after benchmark, stress test after stress test, all flawless." Alistair smiled, a thin, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But a funny thing happened on the way to the signing. You see, I was raised by a mentor, a brilliant man who taught me that a promise is only as good as the truth it's built on. And he taught me to always check the foundation." With a nod to the tech booth, the screen behind him split. On the left, under the heading, "Data Provided by Helios," were the pristine charts and graphs they had all seen. On the right, under the heading, "Original Unaltered Data," a second set of charts appeared. These were not pristine. They were a horror show of red lines plummeting into failure, of temperature gauges skyrocketing past critical limits. A wave of shocked gasps and frantic whispers swept through the room. The members of the Helios board looked at the screen, then at Croft, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "As you can see," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "there's a slight discrepancy. One set of data shows a world-changing success. The other shows a world-burning failure. One is a promise. The other," he paused, his eyes locking onto Croft's, "is a lie." The next slide appeared. It was the email from Julian Croft. Bury the thermal runaway data. I don't care how. Croft leaped to his feet. This is outrageous. Slander. Where did you get this fabricated nonsense? I'm glad you asked, Julian, Alistair said smoothly. The screen changed again, now showing a professional headshot of Clara Hayes. Some of you may recognize this woman. Her name is Clara Hayes. She was a data analyst at your company. She is also the person who discovered this fraud, tried to report it through the proper channels, and was illegally fired and blacklisted for her integrity. He gestured to the front row. She's sitting right here. Perhaps you'd like to ask her if the data is fabricated? Every head in the room swiveled to look at Clara. She met their gazes without flinching, a silent, powerful indictment. Croft was cornered, his face ashen. She's a disgruntled employee. This is corporate espionage. You can't prove any of this. Oh, but we can, Alistair said, signaling for the final part of his presentation. A list of names and faces filled the screen. This is a list of the 17 other engineers and analysts at Helios who were fired or reassigned over the past year. Our internal investigation team has spent the morning speaking with them. It turns out, when they aren't bound by your illegal NDAs, they have quite a lot to say. We have sworn affidavits from 12 of them already, all corroborating Ms. Hayes' story. The room erupted. The Helios board members were on their feet, shouting at Croft, who stood frozen, his empire crumbling around him in a matter of seconds. In the back of the room, Sarah Jennings, Mark O'Donnell, and David Hayes were typing furiously on their laptops. The embargo now lifted. The biggest tech story of the decade was breaking, live, from inside the lion's den. Alistair Finch stood at the podium, a silent observer of the chaos he had unleashed. This wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about the deal. It was about the truth. As security moved in to escort a sputtering Julian Croft from the room, Alistair caught Clara's eye. She gave him a small, tearful nod of gratitude. The whisper in the restaurant had become a roar of justice that was now echoing through the entire financial world. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By the time Julian Croft was bundled into a service elevator, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, the first headlines were already hitting the web. Bloomberg Tech, Finch aborts, 9B Helios acquisition in stunning reversal, alleging massive fraud. Wall Street Journal, the Prometheus deception, whistleblower unravels Helios dynamics at the 11th hour. The market opened to a bloodbath. Helios Dynamics stock, HDYN, was halted within minutes, but not before it had plummeted by over 90% in pre-market trading, wiping out billions of dollars in shareholder value. The company, once the jewel of the industry, was now radioactive. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal and corporate carnage. The SEC launched a formal investigation into Helios Dynamics, Julian Croft, and his executive team. Federal prosecutors began assembling a case for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The 17 engineers Alistair's team had identified became star witnesses, their stories of intimidation and cover-ups painting a damning picture of a corporate culture rotten to the core. Alistair Finch, meanwhile, was lauded as a paragon of corporate integrity. His decision to not just walk away, but to expose the rot publicly was seen as a bold and necessary stand for ethics in an industry often criticized for its move fast and break things mentality. Finch Innovation stock, far from suffering, actually rose by 12% as investors rewarded Alistair's prudent and decisive leadership. But Alistair wasn't finished. He had no intention of letting the valuable core of Helios, the brilliant, ethical engineers and the foundational, albeit flawed technology, perish in the wreckage. He was a builder, not just a destroyer. About a week after the disastrous presentation, he convened a special meeting with his top strategy and R&D teams. Evelyn Reed was there, as was Robert Carlyle, and at the head of the table, seated next to Alistair, was Clara Hayes. Helios Dynamics will file for bankruptcy within the month, Alistair began, his tone all business. The company is worthless, its brand is toxic, its leadership is facing prison time. However, he continued, leaning forward, its assets are not. There are hundreds of brilliant engineers at that company who were either silenced or kept in the dark. The base architecture of the Prometheus chip, once you strip away the fraudulent performance claims, is fundamentally revolutionary. The thermal runaway problem is a significant engineering challenge, not an insurmountable one. He looked around the table. I am proposing that we do not walk away. I am proposing that we acquire the essential assets and intellectual property of Helios Dynamics out of bankruptcy court. We will get it all for pennies on the dollar, a fraction of the original $9 billion. Evelyn Reed's eyes lit up. We could rebuild the Prometheus project from the ground up. Do it right this time. No fake data, no shortcuts. Exactly, Alistair said. But it needs new leadership. It needs a leader who understands the technology, who has unimpeachable integrity, and who has a personal stake in seeing the truth prevail. He turned to Clara Hayes. Clara, I am creating a new subsidiary within Finch Innovations. It will be called the Vance Project in honor of your father. Its sole purpose will be to take the raw potential of the Prometheus architecture and solve the thermal runaway flaw, creating the chip it was always meant to be. I want you to lead it. Clara was stunned into silence. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Me? Mr. Finch? I was a junior analyst. I don't know how to lead a division. You knew how to tell the truth when an entire corporation was built on a lie, Alistair countered gently. You knew how to risk everything for what was right. You have more leadership in your little finger than Julian Croft had in his entire body. You won't be alone. Evelyn will be your technical advisor. I will mentor you personally. We will give you every resource you need. He paused, his gaze intense. I'm not offering you a job, Clara. I'm offering you a chance to finish what you started, to turn the symbol of a massive fraud into a beacon of innovation and integrity. It was then that Arthur Vance, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room at Alistair's invitation, spoke up. He's right, sweetheart, the old professor said, his voice thick with pride. You've always been brilliant. Don't let anyone, especially yourself, tell you otherwise. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but this time they were tears of joy and disbelief. She looked from her father to Alistair, the two most important mentors in her life, one old and one new. She thought of the past year, the humiliation of being fired, the desperation of her job search, the soul-crushing nights serving entitled patrons. And now this. She straightened her shoulders, wiped her tears, and found the voice she never knew she had. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, Mr. Finch, I accept. The room broke into applause. It was more than a new beginning. It was a restoration. The natural order of things, where integrity was rewarded and brilliance was allowed to shine, had been reestablished. Alistair Finch hadn't just dodged a $9 billion bullet. He had turned a near catastrophe into one of the greatest strategic victories of his career, all because he had listened to a whisper. 2 years later, the stage at the World Technology Summit in Geneva was bathed in the signature blue light of Finch Innovations. The auditorium was packed with industry leaders, journalists, and investors, a palpable buzz of anticipation in the air. Alistair Finch, looking healthier and more relaxed than he had in years, stood at the podium. Legacy is a curious thing, he began, his voice amplified throughout the hall. It's not the monuments we build or the wealth we accumulate. It's the principles we leave behind. 2 years ago, my company, and indeed our entire industry, was faced with a crisis of principle. We were reminded that truth is not a negotiable commodity. And out of that crisis, a new promise was born. He smiled. But I'm not the right person to tell you about it. For that, I'd like to introduce the president of the Vance Project, Ms. Clara Hayes. Clara walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The transformation was complete. She moved with an easy confidence, her presence commanding and assured. She was no longer the nervous waitress or the tentative analyst, but a respected leader in her field. Thank you, Alistair, she said, shaking his hand before turning to the audience. The Vance Project was founded on a simple belief that the greatest innovations must be built on a foundation of absolute integrity. For 2 years, my team, many of whom are the brilliant engineers once silenced by the old Helios regime, has worked to solve a problem that was once deemed unsolvable. The massive screen behind her lit up, not with complex charts, but with a simple, elegant animation of a new chip. Today we are unveiling the result. It's called the Vance chip. It is not an iteration of the old Prometheus design, it is a reinvention. We didn't just patch the thermal runaway flaw, we re-engineered the entire architecture around a new, patented heat dissipation technology. It is 10 times more powerful than the original Prometheus design ever promised to be, and it is the most stable and secure AI processing chip ever created. She paused, letting the weight of her statement sink in. The Vance chip is already being integrated into the Finch global cloud, and today we are announcing our first two major partners, NASA, for use in their deep space probe data analysis, and the Global Medical Research Consortium to power AI-driven protein folding for disease research. The announcement sent a shockwave of excitement through the audience. This wasn't just a corporate comeback story, it was a technological leap forward that would have tangible world-changing benefits. Later that evening, at a private reception, Alistair stood with Clara and her father on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. Arthur Vance, now a proud consultant for the project named in his honor, beamed at his daughter. "You did it, Clara," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "You really did it." "We did it," she corrected, looking at Alistair. Alistair simply nodded, a look of deep contentment on his face. He had orchestrated the downfall of a corrupt CEO, saved his company, pioneered a new technology, and launched the career of a brilliant young woman who embodied the very principles he held dear. He hadn't just secured his legacy, he had redefined it. It was no longer just about the innovations he had built, but about the integrity he had defended and the people he had championed. As they watched the city lights dance on the water, Alistair thought back to that moment in the Gilded Quill. The feel of the pen in his hand, the smug look on Julian Croft's face, and the desperate, urgent whisper that had changed everything. He had been surprised by her warning, but the world had been surprised by what he did next. He hadn't just listened, he had acted, amplified her whisper into a roar, and in doing so, had proven that sometimes the most powerful voice in a room isn't the one that belongs to a billionaire, but the one that dares to speak the truth. And so, a single whisper from an ordinary woman with extraordinary courage didn't just save a $9 billion deal, it completely rewrote the future. Alistair Finch's decision reminds us that true power isn't about ignoring the small voices, but having the wisdom to listen to them. Clara Hayes' journey from a blacklisted waitress to the president of a revolutionary tech project shows us that integrity can be a greater asset than any position or title. Their story is a powerful testament to the fact that one moment of courage, one act of listening, can trigger an avalanche of justice and create a legacy of truth that is more valuable than any fortune. What did you think of Alistair's incredible decision? Was it pure genius or a massive risk? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage and consequence inspired you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will surprise and inspire you.